Good evening all. In the last session, we discussed about version control softwares. They are also called as source code repository softwares. For a project development, multiple developers will be available and those developers may work from different locations. For a project, multiple developers will be available and those developers will work from different locations. When the developers are working from different locations, then how that code should be integrated? When the developers are working from different locations, then how the developers code will be integrated at one place? In order to integrate the source code of all the developers, we need one repository that is called as source code repository. So source code repository is used to integrate project to source code, and it is used to provide monitored access. Monitored access also will be available. What is the meaning of monitored access of the source code? Guys, what is the meaning of monitored access of the source code? It is going to track who, when, why, what, everything. Okay, fine. Now here, in the last session, we discussed about what are the repository tools available in the market. SVN, GitHub, Bitbucket, these are the repository tools are available in the market. SVN stands for subversion, which is already outdated. So 5-6 years back, 10 years back, people used to work with SVN in the project, but nowadays people are not using the SVN. It got outdated. Now, currently in the industry, Bitbucket and GitHub tools are trending. Okay, so we are going to work with GitHub. GitHub is one cloud platform where we can create repositories for the project to store the code. In order to work with the GitHub, we need to set up the account in the GitHub, create a GitHub account, www.github.com. There you need to create the account in the GitHub. Once you create the account in the GitHub, you can interact with the GitHub to perform several operations. Okay, fine. All of you able to create the GitHub accounts, guys? All of you able to create the GitHub accounts? All of you able to create the GitHub accounts? Yes, let's log in into our github.com. Let's log in into our GitHub account. So this is my GitHub account. This is my GitHub account. If you go to your profile, there you can see your profile, your repositories, your project, your stars, your gigs, like that. There are upgrade. So some free plans are available in the GitHub and commercial plans also available. Currently, I'm using which plan in the GitHub. Currently, I'm using free plan, all the basics. So now, basic functionality I can use in the GitHub by using this free plan. In the companies, IT companies will purchase commercial pro plan in the GitHub. IT companies will purchase pro plans in the GitHub. Currently, I'm using free plan in the GitHub. Okay. Now, go to your repository. Guys, here, what is a repository? In my GitHub, there are 50 repositories are available. In my GitHub, there are 50 repositories are available. What is the meaning of repositories? Repository, nothing but a location where we will store our project source code. Okay. Git repository, login into GitHub account, working with GitHub. Okay. Login into GitHub account with your credentials. Login into GitHub account with your credentials. We are able to log in. Once you log in the GitHub, you can see repositories. Repositories are nothing but the projects. Okay. Now we can create a repository in GitHub. Create repository in GitHub. What is the meaning of repository? Repository is used to store project source code. Every project will have one repository. Every project will have one repository. Sir, can I create one repository and can I store multiple projects? Can I create one repository for 2 projects? Is it recommended or it is not recommended? Storing 2 projects in one repository recommended. Storing 2 projects in one repository not recommended. It's not at all recommended. One project should have one repository. One project should have one repository. How we need to work with this GitHub? Log in into GitHub account with your login credentials. Then create a repository in GitHub. Repository means a location which is used to store project to source code. Every project will have one repository. For every repository, repo URL will be generated. When we create a repository, unique URL will be generated with a repository name. That is repo URL, GitHub repo URL. All the developers will connect to repository using repository URL. Okay. Now in my project, multiple developers are available. Those developers are working in the different locations. Now in the GitHub, we are creating a repository. For the repository, we will give some name and we are going to create it. When the repository got created, a URL will be generated for the repository. All the developers will use that URL to connect to that repository. That repository is called as project repository URL. Can you guys read these 4 points? Perfect. Repositories are divided into, we can create 2 types of repositories in the GitHub. How many types of repositories, guys? In GitHub, we can create 2 types of repositories. First one is public, second one is private. How many types of repositories we can create in the GitHub, guys? We can create 2 types of repositories in the GitHub. First one is public repository, and the second one is private repository. Public repo means everybody can access, everybody can see, everybody can access, but we can choose who can modify our repository. Private repository means limited access. Private repository means we will choose who can access and who can modify. Public means it is visible for everybody. Public repository means it is visible for everybody. Everybody can access, but we can choose who can modify our repository. Private repository means we will choose who can access and who can modify. Are you able to understand my point? Repository nothing but a place, or repository nothing but a location which is used to store our project to source code. Repository means a place or a location we can store our project to source code. For every project, one repository will be created. In that repository, we will store the project to source code. For every developer, separate repository will be available, or every developer will use the same repository. Repository is specific to project. Repository is specific to developer. Every developer will use a new repository, or all the developers will use the single repository for the project? Single. Now, fine guys. Now, fine. Developers are using a repository and the developers are storing the code in the repository. When the code is stored in the repository by the developers, everybody can access the code in the repository, or only our project developers can access this repository? Will you give the access for everybody in this world to access your project repository? Will you provide the public access for your repository? What is the meaning of public access? What is the meaning of public access? Anybody can see my repository. Anybody can see my repository, but they cannot modify. I will decide who can modify that. Read access will be available for everybody. Write access is limited. Write access is limited when you go for public. Public repository means everybody can access, but we can choose who can modify our repository. That means everybody will have a read permission. Write permission we will give for only for our project developers. If it is public. If it is a private, nobody can access, nobody can see, nobody can modify. I will decide that only these 4 developers should access that repository. Only these 4 developers should see that repository. Only these 4 developers should create and should modify the code in the repository. That is what we are going to do. Now, in the company, we are going to create a public repository for the project, or we are going to create a private repository for the project. In the companies, we are going to create a public repository, or we are going to create a private repositories. In the company, we are going to create a private repository. Now, can we allow other project? There are 2 projects available, guys. There is a project with a name called SBI in the TCS company. And there is another project is available with the name called Passport. Now, SBI project developers can modify the code in the Passport project. Both are belongs to TCS company only. Both are belongs to TCS company only. The developer is belongs to SBI project. Can he connect to the Passport project repository? Can he modify? No. SBI project will have 1 repository. Passport project will have 1 repository. Passport project members should access Passport repository. SBI team project should have SBI repository. Now tell me, do we need to make the repositories as a public, or we need to make the repositories as a private? We need to make them as a private. When we make the repository as a private, anybody can access? No. Anybody can modify? No. I will configure some people who are working in the Passport project. I will configure those people email IDs. Only those people can access. Only those people can modify. In the company, we will create our repositories as private. Then what is the meaning of a public? What is the meaning of a public repository, guys? Can you tell me? What is the meaning of a public repository? Anybody, everybody can read, but they cannot modify. They cannot modify. Samjhe? Public means anybody can read, but we will choose who can modify. Private means nobody can see, nobody can modify. Everything we are going to configure. Everything we are going to configure. Who can access, who can modify, those things we are going to configure. Are you clear with my point? Sir, when we will create a public repositories? When we will go for public, if you are developing a project and you are taking the help of other people, if you are taking the help of other people also, you are developing a POC. You are developing a POC. You want to take the help of your friends to contribute your project, then you can go for public. You can go for public. Clear? Public repository means Read access will be available for everybody. Write access will be given for the specific people. Private repository means read access, write access, we need to modify. We need to modify. Got my point? Got my point? Very good. Very good. Chalo, go and create a repository, guys. Here, I logged in into my GitHub account. So there are several repositories are available. I can create one new repository. Click on new. It is asking the name of the repository. I'm giving the name as 01 DevOps app. You can give any name for the repository. Basically, you can give your project name also. I'm giving the repository name as 01 DevOps app. You can give description for this. Public and private. If you see here, you will understand what is the difference between public repository and private repository. Can you read the difference between public and private? Anyone on the internet can see this repository. You choose who can commit. Commit means modifying. Private, you choose who can see and commit to this repository. Public means anybody can see this. We will choose who can commit. Private means you choose who can see and who can commit to this repository. If you want to provide some documentation for your repository, then you can select add readme file. Readme file means it is going to give you one file where you can write the documentation. If you want to explain what is this repository, then you can go for this readme file. You can go for this readme file. Now add .gitignore. It is asking to add one file called .gitignore. .gitignore means in my project some files I don't want to consider for commit. I want to ignore some files from my project folder. Then the files which you want to ignore from your project folder, you can configure those files in the .gitignore folder. In my project, there are so many files available. Now, simple example, we know that already .class files available, .java files available. In the repository, are you going to keep both .java files and .class files, or you will keep only .java files in the repository? Guys, tell me, do we need to keep the source code in the repository, or we need to keep the bytecode in the repository? Do we need to keep source code in the repository? We need to keep a bytecode in the repository. Source code. Then what about bytecode? In my project, bytecode is also available now. Do I need to commit the bytecode, or I should not commit the bytecode? I need to ignore the bytecode. How can I ignore the bytecode? I will configure that .class files should not be committed. Those .class file names I will configure in the gitignore. Then those files will not be committed. So are you able to understand how to create a repository? So to create a repository, we need to give the name of the repository, and we need to select the type of the repository. And if you want to create a readme file, if you want to explain about your repository, then create a readme file. If you want to ignore some files in the project, then you can choose add gitignore file. Okay, then click on create repository. Now, can you see that repository got created? In this repository, currently nothing is available, guys. Currently nothing is available in the repository. Repository URL got generated. Now, can you see the URL? This is my get repo URL. Can you see this? Can you access that URL, guys? Can you access that URL? Are you able to access the URL which I have given in the chat box? Are you able to access the URL which I have given in the chat box? What is that URL? That is my project repository URL. I have created one repository in the GitHub. Source code repository I have created. For this repository, one URL got generated. Now, we will give that URL to the developers. Developers will connect to that repository using that URL. Developers will connect to that repository using that URL. Can you access that now? Can you access that repository URL now? Can you click on that URL? You are able to access. Why you are able to access? Is it a public repository URL or it is a private repository URL? Public repo URL or it is a private repository URL? That is my private repository URL. Samjha? Samjha? Right. Every repository will have a URL. Using that URL, we will connect to the repository. Using that URL, we will connect to the repository. Understood my point, guys? Understood my point? How to create a repository and what are the options that we have in creating the repository? First, you need to log in into your GitHub account with your credentials. Once you log in into GitHub account, create the repository in the GitHub. Once the repository is created, you can store the source code into that repository. Every project will have one repository, right? All the developers will connect to the repository using repository URL. We can create two types of repositories in the GitHub. We can create two types of repositories in GitHub. One is called public repository. Second one is called private repository. What is the difference between public repository and private repository? What is the difference between public repository and private repository? Public repository means everybody can access, but we will configure who can commit. Private repository means we will configure who can see and who can configure. Now, when the repository is created, can we see that one repository URL got generated? When the repository is created, can you see that one repository URL got created? Yes or no? Can we give this repository URL to all the developers? Can we give this repository URL to all the developers? Come on. Yes or no? Guys, please respond. Yes. Now, once I give this repository URL to the developers, what they will do? Currently, my repository having some data, or my repository is empty repository. My repository having some data, or my repository is empty repository. My repository is having some data, or my repository is having some empty repository. My repository is empty repository. Can we store some files? Can we store the project into this repository now? Can we store the project into this repository now? Yes. In order to store the project into this repository, these are the commands we need to execute. These are called as Git commands. What are the commands we have, guys? Git commands we have here. We need to execute these Git commands. Now, sir, what we are going to do now, let's observe. Let's observe. Let's observe. Here, I have created Git repository in the github.com. This is my GitHub repo. This is my GitHub repo. Where this repository is created? In github.com. It is a cloud platform. github.com is a cloud platform. In that GitHub, in the cloud, I have created one repository. Now here, developer is available in Hyderabad. Now, developer is available in Hyderabad. This developer want to communicate with the repository. Where is the repository available and where is the developer available? Hyderabad location. Repository available in the GitHub location. Developer is available in the Hyderabad location. Are you clear with my point now? That is one developer. This is another developer. This developer is available in Pune location. Okay. This developer is available in Pune location. They want to communicate with the repository. So they need the repository URL or not. Repository created in the GitHub. That GitHub is a cloud platform. Repository created in the GitHub. That GitHub is a cloud platform. Repository created in the GitHub, and GitHub is a cloud platform. Okay. Now developers want to communicate with that repository. Developers want to communicate with the repository. Okay. Right. Now this developer will have a computer, guys. Company will provide a computer for the developer, a laptop or a desktop for the developer. Developer will communicate, developer will use this computer. From this computer, developer want to connect with this GitHub repository. Am I right? Am I right? When you join in the company, they will give you one computer. Using that computer, you need to connect with that GitHub repository and you need to perform the Git operations. You need to connect with the GitHub repository and you need to perform the Git operations. In order to perform the operations in the GitHub, here in the client machine, we need to install Git client software. What is required? Git client software is required in that machine. Using that client software, that a developer or a DevOps engineer will communicate with the GitHub repository. Same thing here also. This developer also will have a computer which is given by his company, which is given by the company. Both developers are belongs to the same company, so they want to communicate with the same repository by using this client software. By using this Git client software, they are going to communicate. They are going to communicate with this GitHub repository. They will communicate with this GitHub repository. This developer will communicate with this laptop. In this laptop, he will install the Git client software. Using that Git client software, these developers or DevOps engineers will communicate with the GitHub repository. Okay, now tell me, how the people will communicate with the GitHub repositories? Repository created in the cloud. GitHub.com we have used. In the GitHub.com, I have created a repository. For the repository, one URL got generated. Now, I will give that URL to developers or DevOps people. Then they want to keep the code in the repository. The developer is writing the code. Whatever the code he is writing, whatever the Java files he created, he want to keep the Java files in the repository. How he will keep the Java files in the repository? The Java code he has developed in his laptop. This developer is having a laptop. In his laptop, he developed the Java files. Now he want to move the Java files from his laptop to repository folder. This Java developer also writing the Java files. He want to move the Java files from his laptop to repository folder. If these developers want to communicate with this repository, then that developer should install Git client softwares. They need to install Git client softwares. Using that Git client software, they can communicate with the GitHub repository server to store the code, to delete the code, to update the code, to retrieve the code. Everything they will perform with the repository by using this Git client software only. They will do that by using Git client software only. Guys, are you clear with my point? Are you able to understand this point? Why we need client software, guys? Can you tell me now? Why we need client software? Can you tell me now? Come on, guys. Why we need client software? Can you tell me that now? To communicate with the repository. Okay. To communicate with the repository. There are so many Git client softwares are available, guys. Git client softwares. Git client softwares. There are multiple client softwares are available. You can use anyone. Nobody will force you. You have to use this particular software in the project. You can use any software. Git bash is one client software. Git GUI is one client software. Third one is Tortoise Git is one client software. Tortoise Git is one client software. Fourth one, Source Tree is one client software, etc. That means we have one client software or we have multiple client softwares. Do we have one Git client software or we have multiple Git client softwares? Come on, guys. Git client softwares are only one. We have multiple client softwares. We have multiple client softwares. You can use any client software. You can use any Git client software to communicate with GitHub repository. It is not mandatory to use only particular client. You have a freedom. You have a luxury. Whichever the client software you like, that client software you can use. But in the interview, they will ask you the questions from Git bash. In the interview, they will ask you questions from the Git bash. In the Git bash, they have the chance to ask the questions from the Git bash in the interview. So first I'm going to explain you how to work with this Git bash, guys. I will tell you how to work with this Git bash now. Are you getting my point? Are you getting my point? Are you getting my point? Yes or no? Right? So, do you need to use only particular client software or we can use any client software? We can use any client software. In the interview, they will ask questions from which client software? In the interview, they will ask questions from which client software? Git bash. They will ask the questions from Git bash. Clear? Now, yesterday, we have downloaded and installed Git client. So whenever you download and install this, you will get the Git bash. All of you able to see Git bash in your system? All of you able to see Git bash in your system? When you right click, can you see Git bash? Open Git bash. Click on this and open Git bash. Can you see that Git bash is opened? Can you see Git bash is opened? How to open Git bash? First, you need to download the Git client software from this URL. you can from this URL, you can download Git client software and you can install it. From this from this URL, you can download the Git client software and you can install it. Okay. Now open Git client, guys. Right click, go here, open Git bash. Are you guys able to open the Git bash? Are you guys able to open the Git bash? Yeah, I've increased the font size. Perfect. Now Git performing Git bash commands, working with Git bash commands, working with Git bash. Git bash we can use as a Git client software to perform operations with GitHub repository. Git bash we can use as Git client software to perform Git operations. Download and install Git client. Download and install Git client. This is the URL. Right click on mouse and choose open Git bash here. It will open Git bash. It will open Git bash. Okay. Once you open the Git bash, now you can execute a command called git help command. Can you see? Can you see the git help command execution now? When I execute git help, what it is doing, guys? When I execute the git help command, what it is doing? These are the common git commands used in various situations. So whenever I execute git help, it is showing me some commands which are used very commonly with the Git client, Git bash. The frequently used Git commands it is displaying here. The frequently used Git commands it is displaying here. In the interview, they will ask questions on these commands only. What is the difference between pull command and push command? What is the difference between commit command and merge command? What is the difference between merge command and rebase command? What is the difference between status command? What is the add command? What is restore command? What is rm command? What is clone command? What is init command? All these commands are frequently used commands, and these are repeatedly asked questions in the interview. Git bash commands are very important. Developers also should know Git bash commands, and DevOps engineers also should know the Git bash commands, because as a DevOps engineer, you are also going to work with the Git repository by using these commands. So it is very important for you to understand Git bash commands. Okay. What is the first command we have executed? Git help command. What is the purpose of Git help command? What is the output of the Git help command? Can you tell me? Can you tell me what is the output of the Git help command? What is the output of the Git help command? Come on. People are not interactive. People are, guys, if you are not responding, then I will lose my interest. If you are not responding in the class when I ask the doubt, if you don't respond, then I will lose my interest. Git help command will display frequently used most famous commands in the Git bash. Very good. Now, sir, help command is going to display the frequently used commands, but I don't know about a command. How can I learn these commands? Git help clone. Clone is one command. Execute it. Is it opening the documentation of the clone command? Is it opening the documentation of the clone command or not? Okay. Right. Right. Git help. It will display frequently used Git commands. Git help command name. Git help command name. It will open documentation for given command. That means if you want to understand the particular command, if you want to understand the syntax of the particular command, then you can go for Git help command name. If you want to see the most famous commands in the Git bash, then you can execute Git help command. It will display frequently used Git commands. If you want to understand a particular command in the Git, if you want to see the documentation of a particular Git command, then Git help command name, it will open documentation for given command. Are you clear with these commands? All of you execute and let me know. Are you able to execute these commands in the Git bash? एक बार चेक करके बताओ भाई. Sirs and madams, please execute and let me know. Are you able to execute these commands in your Git bash? Fast. Successful? Yes, very good. Okay, that's fine. Next one is you need to configure your email ID and your name to use the Git bash, guys. Git config --global user.email is equal to, you need to configure your email ID, whatever your email ID that you have used to create the Git account, that you need to configure. Now similarly, git configure --global user.name, you need to configure your username also by executing these commands. User.name --global user.email user.name. Git config commands. Git config username. How to configure Git username and Git email ID. User.name username email. Okay, no need to give that equals, guys. Just copy this. Yeah, here config username and config username. You need to introduce yourself to the Git. If you want to perform Git operations, then you need to configure your name. Git config, introduce yourself to the Git. Configure your username and email ID in the Git. Configure your email and name in Git bash with the below commands. Configure your email and name in Git bash with below commands. If you want to execute any Git commands, first we need to configure our email ID and username in the Git. Our email ID, username in the Git. So these are the commands. Can you guys execute these commands now? Can you guys execute these commands to configure your email ID and not password guys, email ID and name. We can configure our email ID and our name here. We can configure our email ID and our name here. We can configure our email ID and our name here. Are you able to configure your email and your name in the GitHub by using config command? Password you no need to configure. Whenever you do the commit, it is going to ask you to enter the password. First time when you do the commit, it will ask to enter the password. You need to configure only email and name. You need to configure only email and name. Got it, guys? Okay, next one. We need to understand the several commands in the Git, guys. We need to understand several Git commands. Okay. Saurabh, maybe you have configured that your Notepad++ as a default. So that's why it is opening your HTML file in the Notepad++. If you configure the default application as a browser, then that file will open in the browser, right? Yes. So once it is completed, then we need to understand some commands in the Git. We need to understand some commands in the Git, like git status command will be available, git add command will be available, and $git commit command will be available. Then git remote command will be available. Git push command will be available. Like that, there are several commands in the Git that we need to understand. So if you are comfortable with this as of now, then we'll move forward. Are you clear with these things? How to open Git client, Git bash, how to check the frequently used commands by using help command, and how to see the documentation of a particular command by using help command name, how to configure our email and a name in the Git bash by using name command and email commands. Okay. So before that, I will show you one command called git init command will be available. And there will be one more command called git clone command also will be available. Git init command will be available. And there will be one more command called git clone command is available. Init is available, clone is available, status available, add available, commit available, remote available, push available, pull available, git push available, git pull available, git restore available, git restore available, git fetch available, Git branch command is available. Git branch command is available. Git merge command is available. Git merge command is available. Git rebase command is available. Git rm command is available. Git rm command is available. Git log command is available. There are so many commands. These all are the interview questions for you. These all are the interview questions for you. Okay. Restore, reset, like that. There are several commands available. Now, can you read the names of the commands, guys? Can you read the command names? We will discuss about them. Git init, git clone, git status, git add, git commit, git remote, git push, git pull, git restore, git fetch, git branch, git merge, git rebase, git fork, git rm, git log, git fork. There are so many. There are so many commands available in the git bash. Now, we need to know these commands because they will ask about these commands in the interview. Git init. What is the purpose of git init? To initialize our folder as git working folder, git working tree. To initialize our folder as git working tree. Now you see here in this, I'm going to create a folder as a git folder, git work. Now I want to represent this as my working tree folder in the git. Then I will do right click here, git bash here. How I will represent this is my git folder. I'm going to execute a command called git init command. It is initialized this folder as a git repository folder in my system. So what is the purpose of init command? Init command is used to initialize our folder as a git repository folder. Whenever I execute that git init folder, init command, it created one file called, it created one folder called .git folder. Can you see that .git folder created there? When I execute git init, it created a .git folder. Now see here, let me delete this folder. Folder got deleted. Can I execute that once again? Git init. Is it creating that .git folder when I execute git init command? Guys, tell me. Now, can you guys try that and let me know? Is it creating the .git folder for you also? .git is created. For few people, it will not create. For few people, it will not create. Is there anybody who is not able to see the .git folder when you execute git init command? For Jyoti, it is not displaying. Okay. Is there anyone else? Babu, you can't see. You are unable to see that. Babu Battala. Okay. Jyoti, you are right. That is a hidden folder. That is a hidden folder. Guys, if anybody not able to see the .git folder, go to folder options, file explorer folder options, go to view tab. Here, show hidden files. By default, it will have don't show hidden files option. If you select to show hidden files, then it will display for you. If I select don't show hidden files, apply. Now, is it displaying? Is it displaying the .git? In my system, is it displaying the .git or it is not displaying the .git? It is not displaying now. If I select to show hidden files, click on apply. Now it is displaying. You understand how to display hidden files in our system? The files which are starting with the dot, they are called hidden files. So here in our system, we need to enable show hidden files option. How to enable that? Go here, type file explorer options. You will get a file explorer option. You will get one option called folder options or file explorer options. Click on this. When you go to the file explorer option, there is a view tab. Go to view tab. In the view tab, you need to select the show hidden files. Show hidden files. Click on apply and OK. Can you see this now? Here also view is available. Large icon, small icon, show hidden files. Here also you can select it. In this, we have a view option. In this view option, show hidden items. Like this also you can select. You can display that. Initialize. Clear. So with this, we are able to understand what is git init command. Git init command is used to initialize our folder as a git repository folder. .git is created. And the next one, git clone command, guys. To clone, to download, to clone git repository from GitHub. To download or to clone git repository from the GitHub, we will use git clone. Now here, guys, in order to clone the git repository, you need to have the git repository URL. Now take this URL, go to git bash and execute git clone that URL. Git clone that URL. Now what happened? The repository downloaded into my system. The repository downloaded into my system. Come on. Come on, guys. The repository is downloaded into my system. Yes or no? The repository is downloaded into my system. So what is the syntax for this clone command? What is the syntax for this clone command? In the git repository, in the GitHub, the project is, the repository is already created. The repository is available in GitHub. Whatever the code is available in the GitHub repository, I want to download that code into my system. Then I'm going to use git clone repository URL. Can you guys execute this command in your system? Can you guys execute this command in your system? Git clone this repository URL. If you execute this command in your system, that means you are cloning my repository. You are going to clone my repository. You can clone it from any location, no problem. You can clone it from any location. Create a new folder and do the cloning. Then whatever the git repository we have created, that repository downloaded into our system. The repository is downloaded into our system. Are you able to clone? Are you able to clone? Now, can you please tell me what is the purpose of clone command in the GitHub? Could you please tell me what is the purpose of clone command in the GitHub? What is the purpose of clone command in the GitHub? Any idea? To communicate with the Git repository, or to download the Git repository? To download the Git repository. Now let's go to our DevOps diagram. Let's go to our DevOps diagram. Where is the DevOps diagram? Okay. Now, where is the code available? Where is the code available? Developers are writing the code. Developers will write the code. Developers will keep the code in the repository. Now, who is responsible to download the code from the Git repository? Who is responsible to download the code from the Git repository? Maven will download. Jenkins will download. Jenkins will download. Now, do you know which command Jenkins will use to download the code from the GitHub repository? Which command it will use? clone command. Git to clone command. Now I told you that developers will, guys, this diagram is very important. Every day, next 15 days, we are going to work with the same diagram because Maven, GitHub, Jenkins, SonarQube. Until I complete the 4 tools, I will use the same diagram. Now we understood what is Maven. Maven is a build tool. It is going to compile the project. It is going to package the project. Developers will use the Maven to download the dependencies for compilation, for package creation and all. Once the developer code is completed, developers will store the code into GitHub. All the code will be stored in the GitHub. Code integration will happen in the GitHub. And GitHub will maintain the monitored access. Okay, developers will write the code. Developers will keep the code into the GitHub repository. Developers will keep the code into GitHub repository. Now, who is responsible to download that code from the GitHub and deploy that into server? Which software is responsible to do that activity? Jenkins. Now tell me how Jenkins will download the code from GitHub repository now. Which command it will use to download the code from GitHub repository? Git clone. What is the purpose of git clone? To download the repository from the GitHub. What is there in the repository? What is the meaning of repository? Repository contains a project source code. So Jenkins is going to download the project source code by using git clone command. Once it got the source code, Jenkins will directly deploy the source code into server. Jenkins will deploy the source code into server directly? No. Jenkins will give the code to Maven. What that Maven will do? Maven will compile the project. Maven will package the project. When the package is created, war file will be created. Jenkins will take that war file, will deploy in the server. That is called build and deployment. Now tell me, as a DevOps engineer, you should know how to work with Git repositories, or you no need to know how to work with Git repositories? Do you need to know how to work with Git repositories, or you no need to know how to work with Git repositories? Developers will write the code now. Developers will store the code into Git repository now. Then why should I know about GitHub? Developers will write it, but you have to take it. If you want to take the code from the Git repository, you should know how to take the code from the Git repository. You should know how to execute the Git commands. What are the commands available? What is the purpose of the commands? All these things you should know as a DevOps engineer. Not only developers, DevOps engineers also should work with the Git repositories. You should know how to create a repository. You should know how to clone a repository. You should know how to push, how to pull. All the commands are important for DevOps engineers as well. Samjhe? Init command, which is used to initialize our folder as a Git repository folder. Then git help command. Help command will display all the frequently used most famous Git commands. Help command name. It will give the documentation of that particular command. Git config command to configure your email and to configure your name. Git clone command. It is used to download the code from the GitHub repository. Understood? What is the purpose of clone command? This is the syntax. Git to clone repo URL. Understood? Git to clone command. All right. Now, once you have done the clone command, you should go inside the project, guys. CD space. What is our project? We should go inside the project. Currently, my command prompt is pointing to which location? Can I say that it is pointing to project location? Once it is pointed to project location, execute status command. Git status command will show you what are the changes you have done. Status of the working tree. It will display staged, unstaged, staged, unstaged, and untracked files. What is the purpose of git status command? Git status command will display staged, unstaged, and tracked files. Now, currently, I'm executing git status command. Is it displaying anything for me? Is it displaying anything for me? Nothing, because my project is empty. My project is empty. That's why it is not displaying anything. Now, can I create one dummy file? Touch demo.java. In the Linux, we discussed about what is the touch command. Guys, can you tell me what is the touch command in the Linux? What is the touch command in the Linux? Do you remember? To create an empty file. Chalo, touch demo.java. I have created one Java file. Can you see the status? Oh, now status is displaying. What is the status of the demo.java? What is the status of demo.java? Untracked. Untracked, nothing but it is newly created file. Untracked file, nothing but it is newly created file. Now, git add dot that file I am adding to the staging area. Then see git status. Earlier, that file is displaying in the red color, saying that untracked file. Now I have executed a command called git add space dot. Then that file is added to staging area. Then when I execute git status, changes to be committed. Boss, you have done a file. You have created a file. That file is in the staging area. You need to commit that file. Okay. Status command will display. Now, what is the staging? Staging, temporary location. Staged files. Staged files means the files which are added to commit. Staged files. What is the staged files? The files which are added for commit. The files which are added for commit. Next one, unstaged files. The files which are modified but not added for commit. Untracked files, newly created files. What is the meaning of untracked files? Newly created files. Note, to commit a file, to commit a file or files, we should add that file. We should add it to staging area. Sir, where is this staging area? Whenever you install the GitHub, you go to C directory, users, username. Can you see one folder will be created with the name called .git folder will be created, guys. Now we'll come to that point. Okay. Now, whenever you do this in the git bash, git client is installed. In that git client, it is going to store it. Where the git client is installed, see program files. Can you see git? Temp user. Some memory will be allocated for the git, guys. In that memory, it is going to store these files. These files will be stored in the staging. Staging, nothing but the files which are added for commit. Now, what is the add command? It is used to add files to staging area. It is used to add the files to staging area. Git add dot represent all the files which we have modified. All the files which we have modified will be added to staging area. All the files which we have modified will be added to staging area. Staging area is nothing but the files which are marked for commit. The files which are added to the staging area, they are eligible for commit. They're eligible for commit. They're eligible for commit. Understood? Understood, all of you? Commands are difficult, huh? Commands are difficult, huh? Lot of subject is there, guys. Lot of subject is there. Don't worry. Don't worry. I will put all this subject into your brains also. Whatever I have in my brain, everything I will put in your brain also. Sir, how you are able to remember all these things? That's experience. Daily we are working with this. Daily, every day we are working with this. As I told you, I have experience in the industry. I'm working in the company. So that is our regular activity. This is our regular activity. Working with Git repository is my regular activity. So that's why we are comfortable with all these commands. At any time, we can talk about these commands because practically we have worked on these commands. For you, first time you are listening now, then somewhat of confusion will be there, but don't worry. The Git commands are very important, guys. That's why I have prepared some videos and I have uploaded to repository. Most of the people will not watch these videos because they are available for free of cost. Now you see, there are some videos I have uploaded, almost 4 videos I have uploaded on the Git topic only. In our YouTube channel, I have given 4 videos related to Git, guys. Where is that? Git repository का 4 वीडियो अपलोड किया था मैं. हाँ, Git tutorial for beginners. Go here. Every video is 1 hour. Generally, these videos I have recorded in the Java project batch. For the Java people, I have explained the Git software at that time. I have recorded these videos. I have uploaded in the YouTube. How to work with these commands. What is the status command? What is a tracked file? What is untracked file? In the 2020 only, I have explained all these commands. See, init command, clone command, status, add, commit, push, pull, checkout, reset, log, rm, branch, merge, rebase, stash, both. Git bash commands. Okay. What is the purpose of these commands? What is the syntax of these commands? What is the staged file? What is unstaged file? What is untracked file? Can you see? What is staged file? The files which are added and they are ready to commit. What is unstaged files? Modified files which will be displayed here. We need to stage these files to commit. Untracked files, newly created files, we need to stage them to commit. We need to stage them to commit. I'm executing the status command. Okay, right. Git cached command, rm cached command. Like that. There are so many commands are there that we need to understand. Okay, I will discuss all those commands in our classes also. Don't worry. Okay. Can you go through this video? If you want to revise that once again, you can go through this video. Git bash commands. The most frequently used commands in the Git that every developer should know how to work with these Git commands. Anyhow, I'm going to explain these commands also. Guys, able to follow my classes related to DevOps? I think 5-6 classes already completed. Are you guys able to understand my words? Feeling difficult to understand or easily understandable or difficult? Everything we are discussing is real time. In real time, we are going to do all these activities on daily basis. You have to learn. There is no shortcut. You have to practice and you have to learn. There is no shortcut for learning. And you have to not only attending the classes, you should practice also. Then only you will get full clarity. If you just listen to the class, there is no use. It is waste of your time and waste of your money also. After the class is completed, you have to practice. Okay. Yeah. So we discussed about init command. What is init command? Init command is used to initialize our folder as git working tree folder. To initialize our folder as git working tree folder. Git to clone command to clone the git repository from github.com, to clone the git repository to our machine from github.com. Git to clone get repo URL, project repo URL we need to provide. Project repo URL we need to provide. Git status command, it will display staged file, unstaged file, and untracked file. This is the syntax for the status. Staged files means the files which are added for commit. Unstaged files means the files which are modified but not added for commit. We need to stage them. Untracked files means newly created files. Note, to commit the files, we should add to staging area first. Staging area means a temporary location used by the Git client to commit the files. How to add a file to staging area? Git add file name. If you want to stage a particular file, you can go for git add file name. If you want to stage multiple files, git add dot. Dot will represent all the modified files will be added to staging area. Okay. Unstaged means that file is already committed once, but it is just modified. Untracked means newly created. Unstaged means file is already in the repository, but it is modified in the local. Untracked files means it is just created, a new file. It is not there in the repository. Okay, I hope you are good with this as of now. So tomorrow, Sunday, no class. So please go through the video which I have shared before coming to next session. Before coming to next session, please go through that video which I have shared. It is very helpful, guys. Very helpful. Lot of commands I have explained. Okay, we'll see you on Monday. We'll see you on Monday. Thank you, guys. Happy weekend. Please practice Git commands before coming to Monday session. Bye bye. Good night.